Greetings, adventurers. You're listening to The Quiet Journeys of Professor Atwood with me, Professor Atwood. I'm glad you're here, and I can't wait to tell you about my latest journey. Don't worry, it's a safe space. I'll handle all the danger for you. I designed these stories to help you relax, chill anxiety, and go to sleep. Maybe they'll even put a smile on your face, even if it's a sleepy smile. So please, settle in, relax, and prepare to quietly drift off with me to parts known, unknown, and even some places in between. Comfortable? Very well. Let's get underway. Good evening, adventurers. I hope you're doing well. I also hope you're all cozy and settled in because tonight I'm going to tell you about how I had to deal with a very unusual situation, namely, my ex-wife dating my science nemesis. Not an ideal situation, I'll be honest, and quite unexpected for sure. As you remember, I was on my way to confront Professor P and also try to figure out how to defeat him. If I did, he said he would disclose the whereabouts of Professor Sampson, my old mentor. As I said before, when I first learned of Professor Sampson's sudden and mysterious disappearance, I did try to find him, but I had no luck and eventually had to give up the search. But again, I never lost hope. I wasn't the only one hoping I would find Professor Sampson either. Professor Cook from the Getty was romantically involved with him a while back and also searched for him when he disappeared. She also hoped I could find him, and I assured her I would do my best. Anyway, I was able to locate Professor P's not-so-hidden volcanic lair, and after a little trial and error, I had passed the second challenge, which was finding a way in. Now, these are separate challenges from the actual challenge that he is challenging me to once I got inside, but that's, we'll get to that in due time. But anyway, after the beach and the underwater submarine entrance didn't work out due to mines and maintenance, I launched my aeropod, which was previously my boat pod, and went up and over and then into the volcano, where I found a landing platform and made my way deeper into the pretend volcano. I found Professor P sitting on a throne he made himself, but nothing could have prepared me for who walked in and sat next to him. Yes, my ex-wife, Julia, was there with him, and I'll be honest, that revelation knocked me for a loop. I was still regaining my composure, and I'll tell you all about how things proceeded after that in a moment. But first, I want to tell you about a few things, especially for our new listeners. There are two types of shows in the podcast high-speed show feed. There are the regular episodes, such as what you're listening to right now, and Professor Atwood's Sleepscapes to give you more adventures per month. These sleepscapes are pulled directly from my adventures with all the music and sounds we collect on our journeys. We then remix and remaster them and make them longer so you can create your own adventure in your mind as you settle in and drift off to sleep. And don't forget, you can listen to the show any way you wish. That's why we do the recaps at the beginning. You could listen all the way through. You could just drift off in the middle. It's designed that way. And as always, don't forget to rate and review the show, and maybe post about the show, as that's how other adventurers find us. And if you want more info, merchandise, and donation and ad-free Patreon subscription options, you can also go to whitecatentertainment.com. All right, let's get back to the story. There I was, in the hidden fake volcanic lair of the Infinite Science Cabal, staring down their leader and CEO, Professor P, with my ex-wife sitting next to him, smiling warmly at both of us. I managed to stammer out, "How? Why?" when she just answered, "Well, It's a bit of a story. I suppose I should tell you about it. I agreed, albeit a bit reluctantly. Truth be told, I wasn't sure if it was a story I really wanted to hear. But let me just say something here first. Of course, the first thing that occurred to me was that Julia was being mind-controlled by Professor P's implants. But the problem was, I would have seen the scar of variable length on her face, and her skin looked as smooth and flawless as ever. Okay, yes, even though we're divorced, I admit I still had feelings for her. But seeing her sit next to Professor P certainly served to mitigate those feelings. I think she saw the conflicting emotions written all over my face, as she then smiled kindly and patiently at me. Julia took a deep breath and started her story. They met, as I had suspected, at a neuroscience convention. Now, admittedly, Julia was always a bit of a science bad girl, and I have to say that was part of her attraction. Sure, I bought the Bad Girls of Science calendar she was in, but as you probably expected, the most attractive part of her was always her mind. And she looked great in a lab coat, of course. But she always had her science boundaries. She knew what Professor P and the Infinite Science Cabal had been up to, and had wanted nothing to do with him or them. She always had a strong moral center. Until now, apparently. This is why this partnership, I wasn't even sure what to call it, made no sense to me. Anyway, she told her story about how she and Professor P met at a convention sponsored by the largest professional neuroscience organization in the world, which is the Society for Neuroscience, or SFN. Now, it is based in the United States, but includes many members from other countries. Since its founding in 1969, the SFN has grown steadily. As of 2010, it recorded 40,290 members from 83 countries. Annual meetings, held each year in a different American city, draw attendance from researchers, postdoctoral fellows, graduate students, and undergraduates, as well as educational institutions, funding agencies, publishers, and hundreds of businesses that supply products used in research. Now, while the SFN is arguably the largest neuroscience organization, they're not the only game in town. Other major organizations devoted to neuroscience include the International Brain Research Organization, or IBRO, which holds its meetings in a country from a different part of the world each year, and the Federation of European Neuroscience Societies, or FENS, which holds a meeting in a different European city every 2 years. FENS comprises a set of 32 national-level organizations, including the British Neuroscience Association, the German Neuroscience Society, and the French Society of Neurosciences. The first National Honor Society in Neuroscience, NeuroSci, was founded in 2006. Numerous youth neuroscience societies which support undergraduates, graduates, and early career researchers also exist, such as Simply Neuroscience and Project Encephalon. In 2013, the BRAIN Initiative was announced in the U.S. The International Brain Initiative was created in 2017, currently integrated by more than 7 national-level brain research initiatives in the U.S., Europe, Japan, China, Australia, Canada, Korea, and Israel. Now, in addition to conducting traditional research in laboratory settings, neuroscientists have also been involved in the promotion of awareness and knowledge about the nervous system among the general public and government officials. Such promotions have been done by both individual neuroscientists and large organizations. Well, for example, individual neuroscientists have promoted neuroscience education among young students by organizing the International Brain Bee, which is an academic competition for high school or secondary school students worldwide. Now, unfortunately, the Infinite Science Cabal also has sponsored competitions with funding supplied from banks, insurance companies, social media platforms, oil companies, and political action committees. Their goal is to find the next generation of young, brilliant scientists who also have, well, flexible moral centers. Luckily, the ISP, the International Science Police, have shut some of these down, but they're like those trendy pop-up restaurants. There's always one somewhere. So it's an ongoing struggle to keep the young scientists from being recruited for nefarious purposes. This is where Julia and Professor P first met, she said. Julia didn't realize she was at an Infinite Science Cabal science event, and she had signed up to be a mentor. But during the final competition, when the judges asked the young finalists to add laser beams to their helper robots, she knew something was amiss. She called the ISP herself, the International Science Police, and in the confusion as they showed up, she ran into Professor P, who assured her it wasn't his intention to arm the robots, and it was all just a misunderstanding. The lasers were supposed to be used for teaching purposes and would remain at low power. Julia said she was, of course, skeptical, but there seemed to be a sincerity in Professor P that wasn't there before, so it got her thinking a bit. But they didn't have much time to continue their conversation, as he was then busy escaping via an instantly inflatable hot air balloon for one. His minions, however, weren't so fortunate. They were caught by the International Science Police, which would also explain why there were so few minions in his volcanic lair. Anyway, let's get back to the legitimate competitions. In the United States, large organizations such as the Society for Neuroscience have promoted neuroscience education by developing a primer called Brain Facts, collaborating with public school teachers to develop neuroscience core concepts for K-12 teachers and students, and co-sponsoring a campaign with the Dana Foundation called Brain Awareness Week to increase public awareness about the progress and benefits of brain research. In Canada, the Canadian National Brain Bee is held annually at McMaster University. Neuroscience educators formed Faculty for Undergraduate Neuroscience, or FUN, in 1992 to share best practices and provide travel awards for undergraduates presenting at Society for Neuroscience meetings. So you can see also that neuroscientists often also have a playful sense of humor. Except, of course, for Professor P. Anyway, neuroscientists have also collaborated with other education experts to study and refine educational techniques to optimize learning among students, which is an emerging field called educational neuroscience. Federal agencies in the United States, such as the National Institute of Health and National Science Foundation, have also funded research that pertains to best practices in teaching and learning of neuroscience concepts. But, Julie continued, and said it appeared their paths were destined to cross again. Julia and Professor P realized they had a common interest in neuromorphic engineering, although for vastly different purposes. This is where it got a little odd. Julia started making excuses for Professor P, saying that he admits he's been misguided in the past, and that with the right person at his side, he wanted to change. And right then and there is when I knew they were in a relationship. It's a definitive red flag when one person is smitten enough with the other to think they can change the other. It's also a definite sign of a relationship as well. I'm not saying that's what ultimately caused us to separate, because Julia and my irreconcilable differences were a bit too many. But I think trying to change the other was something we were both guilty of throughout our relationship. If I could only go back in time. Well, I mean, I can, but I don't think it would have helped. The heart wants what it wants and behaves the way it does. It most certainly does not follow scientific principles or protocols. Now, in case you didn't know, neuromorphic engineering is a branch of neuroscience that deals with creating functional, physical models of neurons for the purposes of useful computation. The emergent computational properties of neuromorphic computers are fundamentally different from conventional computers in the sense that they are a complex system, and that the computational components are interrelated with no central processor. Sensors can also be made smart with neuromorphic technology. An example of this is the event camera's BrainScale S, a brain-inspired multi-scale computation in neuromorphic hybrid systems. A a hybrid analog neuromorphic supercomputer located at Heidelberg University in Germany. You see, it was developed as part of the Human Brain Project's neuromorphic computing platform and is the complement to the Spinnaker supercomputer, which is based on digital technology. The architecture used in BrainScale S mimics biological neurons and their connections on a physical level. Additionally, since the components are made of silicon, these model neurons operate on average 864 times that of their biological counterparts. Recent advances in neuromorphic microchip technology have led to a group of scientists to create an artificial neuron that can replace real neurons in diseases. And this was where their purposes diverged. Julia saw the potential to heal people, and Professor P saw the potential to control them, both with the same technology. But admittedly, Julia said, Professor P was charming, and they discussed things over drinks and began to understand each other. Julia saw Professor P was misguided but passionate in his scientific endeavors, and Professor P saw in Julia an altruism he knew he was missing. She said they later saw each other again in between science conferences, and Professor P showed a real desire to change. And Julia admitted that while being skeptical at first, she came to believe him. And she added the main problem was that they both knew I wouldn't approve of their relationship. That, of course, was an understatement. But then again, I added, we were divorced. Why would she need my approval anyway? And then she added that we had 2 kids, and she didn't want holiday gatherings to be awkward. Now, I obviously hadn't considered that, and my brow must have furrowed because Julia saw the disapproval on my face. It was then that Professor P chimed in and said that neuromorphic engineering had been a bridge to their love and to their mutual understanding. Now, I'm not really prone to emotional outbursts, but I will say that Professor P's statement almost made me sick to my stomach. Julia added that Professor P had renounced mind control on people and in animals. I asked, well, what about the arrogant messenger raven with the science challenge he sent me? Julia said, okay, well, that was the last one. My brow must have furrowed even more, because after that Julia said that basically, this whole science challenge was a compromise between them. Julia wanted Professor P to just give me the location of Professor Sampson, but Professor P wanted to keep some semblance of a villain in front of the infinite science cabal, so we had to have a 3-step science challenge at a minimum. Plus, due to our history, just giving me the information I wanted was a bit of a bridge too far for Professor P, apparently. Even so, Julia and Professor P both felt this would be the best way to introduce me to their relationship. Okay, well, I could have thought of 1,000 other different ways, but I'll admit none of them sounded any better, so Julia's idea may have had some merit. It was all starting to make sense. Why the challenge and why now? I mean, it made sense, sure, but I'm certainly not saying I liked where things were going. But there was something else I was beginning to feel. Hope. It was looking like Professor P really did know the whereabouts of Professor Sampson. Once I passed these 3 upcoming science challenges, he would give me that information, and while I didn't trust him, I did trust Julia. She would make sure he kept his word. Julie continued and said it would make a little more sense if we just talked about neuromorphic engineering a little bit more. I wasn't sure how that part connected, but at this point I was being nothing but patient. I figured I may as well be patient a little bit longer. She continued and said that neuromorphic engineering is, for now, set apart by the inspiration it takes from what we know about the structure and operations of the brain. Neuromorphic engineering translates what we know about the brain's function into computer systems. Work is mostly focused on replicating the analog nature of biological computation and the role of neurons in cognition. The biological processes of neurons and their synapses are dauntingly complex and thus very difficult to artificially simulate. A key feature of biological brains is that all of the processing in neurons uses analog chemical signals. This makes it obviously hard to replicate brains in computers because the current generation of computers is completely digital. However, the characteristics of these chemical signals can be abstracted into mathematical functions that closely capture the essence of the neuron's operations. Now, don't get me wrong, the goal of neuromorphic computing is not to perfectly mimic the brain in all of its functions, but instead to extract what is known of its structure and operations to be used in a practical computing system. No neuromorphic system will claim nor attempt to reproduce every element of neurons and synapses, but all adhere to the idea that computation is highly distributed throughout a series of small computing elements analogous to a neuron. While this sentiment is standard, researchers tend to chase this goal with different methods. As early as 2006, researchers at Georgia Tech published a field programmable neuroarray. The chip was the first in a line of increasingly complex arrays of floating gate transistors that followed programmability of charge on the gates of MOSFET to model the channel ion characteristics of neurons in the brain, and was one of the first cases of a silicon programmable array of neurons. In November 2011, a group of MIT researchers created a computer chip that mimics the analog ion-based communication in a synapse between two neurons using 400 transistors and standard CMOS manufacturing techniques. In June 2012, Spintronic researchers at Purdue University presented a paper on the design of a neuromorphic chip using lateral spin valves and memristors. They argue that the architecture works similarly to neurons and can therefore be used to test methods of reproducing the brain's processing. In addition, these chips are significantly more energy efficient than conventional ones. Neurogrid, built by Brains and Silicon at Stanford University, is an example of hardware design using neuromorphic engineering principles. The circuit board is composed of 16 custom-designed chips, referred to as neurocores. Each neurocore's analog circuitry is designed to emulate neural elements of 65,536 neurons, maximizing energy efficiency. The emulated neurons are connected using digital circuitry designed to maximize spiking throughput. A research project with implications for neuromorphic engineering is the Human Brain Project that is attempting to simulate a complete human brain in a supercomputer using biological data. It is made up of a group of researchers in neuroscience, medicine, and computing. Henry Markham, the project's co-director, has stated that the project proposes to establish a foundation to explore and understand the brain and its diseases, and to use that knowledge to build new computing technologies. The three primary goals of the project are to better understand how the pieces of the brain fit and work together, to understand how to objectively diagnose and treat brain disease, and to use the understanding of the human brain to develop neuromorphic computers. Since the simulation of a complete human brain will require a powerful supercomputer, the current focus on neuromorphic computers is being encouraged. $1.3 billion has been allocated to the project by the European Commission. The Blue Brain Project, led by Henry Markham, aims to build biologically detailed digital reconstructions and simulations of the mouse brain. The Blue Brain Project has created in silico models of rodent brains while attempting to replicate as many details about its biology as possible. The supercomputer-based simulations offer new perspectives on understanding the structure and functions of the brain. In 2019, the European Union funded the project Neuromorphic Quantum Computing, exploring the use of neuromorphic computing to perform quantum operations. Neuromorphic quantum computing is an unconventional type of computing that uses neuromorphic computing to perform quantum operations. It was suggested that quantum algorithms, which are algorithms that run on a realistic model of quantum computation, can be computed equally efficiently with neuromorphic quantum computing. Both traditional quantum computing and neuromorphic quantum computing are physics-based unconventional computing approaches to computations that do not follow the von Neumann architecture. They both construct a system, a circuit, that represents the physical problem at hand, and then leverage their respective physics properties of the system to seek the minimum. Neuromorphic quantum computing and quantum computing share similar physical properties during computation. Well, I will say that was a lot, even for me. Julia said that their shared goal was to create a neuromorphic quantum computer that would help the human brain process information and also repair it, as the medical applications were many and far-reaching. And I quickly questioned that there was no underlying purpose, like, say, mass mind control through a central server farm. Professor P shook his head and said no, absolutely not. This was now his chosen future, and also the future direction of the Infinite Science Cabal. He admitted that not all the members would be happy about it, but he would deal with them at the next board meeting, as he had added the agenda item of change direction of the Infinite Science Cabal from evil to good right after the reading of the minutes of the previous meeting. I was still quite skeptical, but Professor P and Julia said they understood my suspicion and that I should not worry. Finally, a minion showed up and offered to bring me to my room. Professor P said I was probably tired from my journey, and that we would start the science challenges in the morning. Now, I suppose I had no choice, so I followed the minion and retired for the evening. Even though I had gotten some questions answered, I still had a few more, but I suppose they would have to wait until tomorrow. And I will tell you all about my science challenges with Professor P next time. But before I end this evening's story, I want to talk to you about something. Change. And this time, there's a bit of a mixed connotation. Change is good, change can be healthy, and change is sometimes even necessary. But this is a personal choice to change. And although it's tempting and seems doable, you can't change other people. Let me repeat that. You can't change other people. This is especially true in relationships. You think, oh, I can change him or her, or they'd be perfect if they just did X. None of these things are helpful or useful ways of thinking, and they are scientifically devoid of merit. Change must come from within, and it's only possible through a willfulness to do so, and only for yourself. So even if you think you've changed someone, you really haven't. They've changed themselves, and at most you deserve partial credit for your support. But my point is, well, stop. It's something I've had to learn, and it's something I see often enough, especially in relationships. Now, on the positive side, you can offer support and positive encouragement to someone, but they have to do the work. And you're not the foreman of someone else's change. It's up to them. And at the end of the day, you only have control over change in one person, you. And that's actually a good thing. And it means when it comes to you, you can be anything you want. Do anything you want. Just don't become a third-rate science supervillain in a fake volcano. Do me that one favor. Good night, adventurers.
The Quiet Journeys of Professor Atwood was created, written, and performed by Chris Mancini and produced by White Cat Entertainment. It is a work of fiction. Maybe. Music and sound design by Ron Tansky at rontanskymusic.com. For more info and merchandise, including t-shirts, mugs, and blankets, go to whitecatentertainment.com.